quivering and his hair on end, would wonder how I did not, seized with sudden frenzy, dash myself from some precipice, and so close my eyes for ever on the sad end of the world. But the powers of love, poetry, and creative fancy will dwell even beside the sick of the plague, with the squalid and with the dying. A feeling of devotion, of duty, of a high and steady purpose elevated me. A strange joy filled my heart. In the midst of saddest grief, I seemed to tread air, while the spirit of good shed round me an ambrosial atmosphere, which blunted the sting of sympathy, and purified the air of sighs. If my wearied soul flagged in its career, I thought of my loved home, of the casket that contained my treasures, of the kiss of love, and the filial caress, while my eyes were moistened by purest dew, and my heart was at once softened and refreshed by thrilling tenderness. Maternal affection had not rendered Idris selfish. At the beginning of our calamity she had, with thoughtless enthusiasm, devoted herself to the care of the sick and helpless. I checked her, and she submitted to my rule. I told her how the fear of her danger palsied my exertions, how the knowledge of her safety strung my nerves to endurance. I shewed her the dangers which her children incurred during her absence, and she at length agreed not to go beyond the enclosure of the forest. Indeed, within the walls of the castle we had a colony of the unhappy, deserted by their relatives, and in themselves helpless, sufficient to occupy her time and attention, while ceaseless anxiety for my welfare and the health of her children, however she strove to curb or conceal it, absorbed all her thoughts, and undermined the vital principle. After watching over and providing for their safety, her second care was to hide from me her anguish and tears. Each night I returned to the castle, and found there repose and love awaiting me. Often I waited beside the bed of death till midnight, and through the obscurity of rainy, cloudy nights rode many miles, sustained by one circumstance only, the safety and sheltered repose of those I loved. If some scene of tremendous agony shook my frame and fevered my brow, I would lay my head on the lap of Idris, and the tumultuous pulses subsided into a temperate flow. Her smile could raise me from hopelessness, her embrace bathe my sorrowing heart in calm peace. Summer advanced, and, crowned with the sun's potent rays, plague shot her unerring shafts over the earth. The nations beneath their influence bowed their heads and died. The corn that sprung up in plenty lay in autumn rotting on the ground, while the melancholy wretch who had gone out to gather bread for his children lay stiff and plague-struck in the furrow. The green woods waved their boughs majestically, while the dying was spread beneath their shade, answering the solemn melody with inharmonious cries. The painted birds flitted through the shades, the careless deer reposed unhurt upon the fern, the oxen and the horses strayed from their unguarded stables and grazed among the wheat, for death fell on man alone. With summer and mortality grew our fears. My poor love and I looked at each other and our babes. "We will save them, Idris," I said. "I will save them. Years hence we shall recount to them our fears, then passed away with their occasion. Though they only should remain on the earth, still they shall live, nor shall their cheeks become pale, nor their sweet voices languish." Our eldest in some degree understood the scenes passing around, and at times he with serious looks questioned me concerning the reason of so vast a desolation. But he was only 10 years old, and the hilarity of youth soon chased unreasonable care from his brow. Evelyn, a laughing cherub, a gamesome infant, without idea of pain or sorrow, would, shaking back his light curls from his eyes, make the halls re-echo with his merriment, and in 1,000 artless ways attract our attention to his play. Clara, our lovely, gentle Clara, was our stay, our solace, our delight. She made it her task to attend the sick, comfort the sorrowing, assist the aged, and partake the sports and awaken the gaiety of the young. She flitted through the rooms like a good spirit, dispatched from the celestial kingdom to illumine our dark hour with alien splendour. Gratitude and praise marked where her footsteps had been. Yet when she stood in unassuming simplicity before us, playing with our children, or with girlish assiduity performing little kind offices for Idris, one wondered in what fair lineament of her pure loveliness, in what soft tone of her thrilling voice, so much of heroism, sagacity, and active goodness resided. The summer passed tediously, for we trusted that winter would at least check the disease. That it would vanish altogether was a hope too dear, too heartfelt to be expressed. When such a thought was heedlessly uttered, the hearers, with a gush of tears and passionate sobs, bore witness how deep their fears were, how small their hopes. For my own part, my exertions for the public good permitted me to observe more closely than most others the virulence and extensive ravages of our sightless enemy. A short month had destroyed a village, and where in May the first person sickened, in June the paths were deformed by unburied corpses, the houses tenantless, no smoke arising from the chimneys, and the housewife's clock marked only the hour when death had been triumphant. From such scenes I have sometimes saved a deserted infant, sometimes led a young and grieving mother from the lifeless image of her firstborn, or drawn the sturdy labourer from childish weeping over his extinct family. July is gone, August must pass, and by the middle of September we may hope. Each day was eagerly counted, and the inhabitants of towns, desirous to leap this dangerous interval, plunged into dissipation, and strove by riot, and what they wished to imagine to be pleasure, to banish thought in opiate despair. None but Adrian could have tamed the motley population of London, which, like a troop of unbitted steeds rushed to their pastures, had thrown aside all minor fears, through the operation of the fear paramount. Even Adrian was obliged in part to yield, that he might be able, if not to guide, at least to set bounds on the license of the times. The theatres were kept open, every place of public resort was frequented, though he endeavoured so to modify them as might best quiet the agitation of the spectators, and at the same time prevent a reaction of misery when the excitement was over. Tragedy, deep and dire, were the chief favourites. Comedy brought with it too great a contrast to the inner despair. When such were attempted, it was not unfrequent for a comedian, in the midst of the laughter occasioned by his disproportioned buffoonery, to find a word or thought in his part that jarred with his own sense of wretchedness, and burst from mimic merriment into sobs and tears, while the spectators, seized with irresistible sympathy, wept, and the pantomimic revelry was changed to a real exhibition of tragic passion. It was not in my nature to derive consolation from such scenes. From theatres whose buffoon laughter and discordant mirth awakened distempered sympathy, or where fictitious tears and wailings mocked the heartfelt grief within. From festival or crowded meeting, where hilarity sprung from the worst feelings of our nature, or such enthralment of the better ones, as impressed it with garish and false varnish, from assemblies of mourners in the guise of revellers. Once, however, I witnessed a scene of singular interest at one of the theatres, where nature overpowered art, as an overflowing cataract will tear away the puny manufacture of a mock cascade, which had before been fed by a small portion of its waters. I had come to London to see Adrian. He was not at the palace, and though the attendants did not know whether he had gone, they did not expect him till late at night. It was between 6 and 7 o'clock, a fine summer afternoon, and I spent my leisure hours in a ramble through the empty streets of London, now turning to avoid an approaching funeral, now urged by curiosity to observe the state of a particular spot. My wanderings were instinct with pain, for silence and desertion characterized every place I visited, and the few beings I met were so pale and woebegone, so marked with care and depressed by fear, that, weary of encountering only signs of misery, I began to retread my steps toward home. I was now in Holborn, and passed by a public house filled with uproarious companions, whose songs, laughter, and shouts were more sorrowful than the pale looks and silence of the mourner. Such an one was near, hovering round this house. The sorry plight of her dress displayed her poverty. She was ghastly pale, and continued approaching, first the window and then the door of the house, as if fearful yet longing to enter. A sudden burst of song and merriment seemed to sting her to the heart. She murmured, "Can he have the heart?" and then mustering her courage, she stepped within the threshold. The landlady met her in the passage. The poor creature asked, "Is my husband here? Can I see George?" "See him?" cried the woman. "Yea, if you go to him. Last night he was taken with the plague. We sent him to the hospital." The unfortunate inquirer staggered against a wall. A faint cry escaped her. "Oh, were you cruel enough," she exclaimed, "to send him there?" The landlady meanwhile hurried away, but a more compassionate barmaid gave her a detailed account, the sum of which was, that her husband had been